Today we'll be talking about the whole truth about service objects, but okay, it's working. So first, let's give to the Caesar what belongs to the Caesar, and give great kudos to MonteTalks for this amazing event and the participation in the Ruby community by sharing knowledge, organizing events, internships, and so on. So great, thank you, MonteTalks, for all you do for Ruby community. And let's, this is me again. So what's more, I'm working as a senior software engineer in House Call Pro, mailing, gRubyKodzi. Let's go. So let me tell you the story located in the history of Ruby on Rails. So we have like second presentation today about the history of Rails maybe, but not connected with the dates, but with the approaches of organizing logic in Rails applications. So there are two fabulous and amazing things in Rails, in Ruby on Rails framework. Those are Rails way and convention over configuration. So those two things allow each developer enter to the project, to each project, and just deliver the value from one day, from first day of work. So those two things allow Ruby on Rails developers deliver fabulous projects. But each application driven by those two concepts can be not sufficient for complex logic data or logic structures. So once upon a time, I was working in a company using Ruby on Rails. It was many years ago. Not so many, but let's say many. And we got the project. And we thought how to start the project and where to organize the logic. It was a startup, so like in the startups, everything should be delivered fast. So where to place the logic in our Ruby on Rails project? Let's place it into controllers. And after placing our logic into controllers, application grows, month passes, and we came up with the controllers where the 2,000 lines per controller was the minimum. So we had many actions inside the controllers using private methods, and different actions called the same private method inside the controller. And refactoring this or debugging this was a, let's not call it. So we had the great design pattern for Rails applications, like fat controllers, thin everything else. So everything was inside the controllers. And obviously, it was a startup in early phase. So the client doesn't or haven't paid for tests. So we haven't written any specs. So everything in controllers, no specs. Sounds interesting, right? So we tried to make our logic a bit reusable. So we read that there is a thing in Rails application that's called concerns. So we just created some concerns included into controllers. So it was Ruby modules or Ruby classes. That was not bad. We moved our logic to the concerns. But then we needed some data on the presentation layer. So we maybe transfer our logic to the helpers layer in the Rails application. But after, the logic was complex, and it was connected with data models or with active record models in general. So we decided to go with next famous design pattern in Rails community, thin controllers, fat models. You see now the connection with my blog and everything else. It's my favorite design pattern in Rails. So we put the logic inside the models, and can you guess what we achieve? We achieve just the whole logic from controllers, taken to the concerns, then to helpers, and then to models. So it was a tragedy. No tests, still no tests. Still is the same step. And then one person has been recruited to our team, and he said that there are services. So now each Ruby on Rails developer who is working on the application know the service or service object pattern. And here we are. Oh, short introduction to the topic, right? So we have the services in Rails application, and services came so strong to the Rails, like Rails developers' mindset, that we don't no longer have the MVC pattern, but we have the MVC plus services pattern. So MVC is the base of Rails, but now every Rails developer probably knows or used already the service pattern in the application. So what is service actually? Service is actually the class which gathers all logic outside of the MVC, outside of models, view, or controller, sorry. And it's called by MVC. Actually, it means that it is called probably by controller or maybe by model in some rare cases, but not recommended. And here is what you can see in any legacy code base. You can see some user service, notification service. And when you are working on a domain which is providing services like, for example, for nurses, you can have service also. So a lot of fun with classes. And Rails accepts the services by default. So now when you are creating the services directory in the Rails app directory, it will be loaded automatically, just by default, since I guess Rails 5. So basically, Rails was built on MVC, and MVC is like the heart and the core of the Rails framework. Rails cannot exist without MVC somewhere in the heart of the developers. But with the services, we have MVCs. And we have also service objects. So we have MVCSO, new patterns. So how it's working? I reordered a bit the letters in order to just present the flow of the application, how it's actually working. So first is the view. View is the place where the user gets where the application gets the order from their user. So we click a button, we input some data to the input field, we submit the form. We are ordering something from the application. Then we have the controller. And the controller receives the order from users, process it somehow, return back to the view or like render JSON, something like this. And we have model. Model is like mapper for data, data structures, and it operates on persistence, in short words. I think you are all interested in Ruby or Rails, so I don't need to go much deeper into those patterns. And we have services. And service is taking everything which is connected with processing the logic outside of the model and the controller. And we have one last letter in MVCSO. So I don't know how to connect it with the rest. So I just put O. And I think that called the service object, the name service object is just to separate our Rails services from what Java guys have in their application. So we have MVCSO. And service objects. What actually service objects are? So services does not equal to service objects. I think I want to introduce this like distinguishment, difference between those two patterns. So service is a class, as I said before, with multiple public methods, which is gathered from like controller. The name of the service is a noun, so like user service, something service, or something user creator, or something like this. And it can be understood rather like a facade, which is like receiving the data from the controller, asking models, doing some things, and returning back data to the controller, and controller is returning data back to the views. And this is a bit example of how the service works. And now I see that I made the biggest mistake of development presentation, that I put the slide on the dark background. But let's say it's visible. So it's like service. Service object is a small class with one public method, and it's strongly should obey the single responsibility principle. So we need to have the class which is responsible only for the one thing. That's why we have the only one public method, and name is the verb. So you can see your services like create user, send notification, or something like this. So those are just general examples. And here are the naming examples and potential examples of the implementation. So we have class enroll to course, we have the call method, course, user, and so on. It's making some magic, doing some logic, and like doing the work. And service object, first of all, should be the small class, but in theory. I already seen the service object classes, which has also hundreds of lines, but it all depends on the developers in the project. If they are okay with that, okay, let them work. So that's it. That's a short difference between services and service objects. And is it really it? I guess it's something more to say here. So why we use service objects? Why we use them? We have some logic in the application, as I said in the beginning. We had the logic in the project, in the controllers, and we wanted to have it reusable. We wanted to have like reusable components of the logic of the services which we want to connect, and we just put the service object into application, and we can now feel like software architects. We are just implementing something more complex. We have service objects. But what should service object do? So recently I joined the company House Call Pro, which one of those mission or vision or some phrases, wise phrases, is do the work. And I really loved this short phrase. So that's what our code should do. It should do the work. So we put the service in order to do the work. So we have MVC, models, views, controllers, and we have somewhere the services. And instead of services, we can have different other objects like foreign objects, validators, use cases, commands, actions, and so on. So we added them. Our application grows. We add other layers. We add other directories. So we add commands. Someone read about the command design pattern. We added commands. We added form objects. We added services. We added policies to gather some business logic. We have factories to generate objects. We have interactors. Who read the Robert Martin books about the clean architecture know about the interactors. So there is a gem. So we introduced interactors, validators, use cases, managers, contracts. This is how we introduce another junior developer to the project now. We have different layers in the application. So just introducing service objects can lead us to something like this. So we need to do it wisely. So again, why we introduce services to the application? We need to have separation of concerns. We don't need different directories like models, form objects, validators, and so on. We want to have separate. What the heck? We want to have separation of concerns so that our domain logic is separated into chunks. And those chunks are not connected with each other. So we obey the single responsibility principle. Our chunks are small, and they are responsible to the one single actor, and they have only one single reason to change. So SRP, okay, it's working. We have reusability. So we have the service like for sending notifications with some parameters into the main method. We can just use it in different places in the application. Testability. Wojtek already talked about the testing in isolation, testing doubles. So using doubles, it's a great way to test services or calling services inside the application. So we can test services in isolation. We can test chunk of our logic in isolation. As you remember, the first steps of the application I already mentioned in the beginning, the whole logic was in the controller. So the only way we started to write specs for that is just request specs. We were sending some parameters and check if the controller is responding with correct data. Here, we can just test the controller action if it's calling the right service. And this service can be tested in isolation. And last thing, we can reduce the coupling by using those services, but if you really think it will reduce the coupling, good luck. It won't. Because you came with the situation where the service is calling another service. So let's go to the common approaches of creating service classes and service objects in the application. So services. Single class, as I mentioned in the beginning. I will be repeating that all the time because I defined that difference, so I want to just emphasize it. It has many methods and should be stateless. So when you have service, like in the beginning, user service, which is doing many things, should be stateless. Because if it's stateful, please be careful. Once upon a time, I printed the book of the poetry I wrote when I was 15. So it's like something I learned during this time. So be careful when you have state in the service which is responsible for multiple things, because the state can impact the actions you don't know or you can't predict. So be careful with the states. And if you have state in this kind of service, this can lead to this brown little thing. But why we create those kinds of services? Because we're afraid of having multiple classes. Once upon a time, in different project, different company, I was working in the team of 4 developers. And we are implementing features. And we had the feature which is perfectly designed and described by the product owner, and it was perfectly designed and described to be implemented as another class. But those developers decided to put it into something service something. Because we will have too many classes. Can you ever seen too many classes? If you know Abelard Giza, Polish stand-upper, he has some phrase in his sketch that when you enter to the forest, there can be a hunt on the rabbits because there are too many rabbits. And you enter to the forest and you see that there are too many rabbits. And there are rabbits everywhere. So it's the same situation that you have too many classes and there are classes everywhere. So we are programmers, we should love classes. And don't be afraid, we can have service objects. So we have service objects, and service objects are small classes. One public method. Name is the verb, like create user. And they can be scoped in modules. How? We can scope them in modules by models, by active record models, but it's like the thinking trap. Because we, Rails developers, are usually thinking about the modules like reflection or context for active record models, but that's not that easy. Because we have business logic, we need to have it rather scoped by business context. Like famous example, for example, is the ordering and making orders in e-commerce application. So thinking like by models, we will have products module, we will have orders module, we should have our pricing module, for example. But in general, we can just have different modules for that. We can just have orders module, which do something with the products. Yeah. So there is needed different way of thinking here. So what are the naming conventions for that? So in the application I was working, or I was reading the code, there were different structures. There were services, service objects, directories, managers, processors, interactors, commands, actions, handlers, pipes, monads, interceptors. Any project, any developer call it as he wants. So it depends on the company and practices and on which conference someone participated last time when starting the project. So we can have the service object class scoped in users module, and we have the first possibility to name the service object like create user, or we can see something like this, that we have users module and we have just create, update, or something. But when you see only create, update, delete, show, or something, it means that you have very sophisticated CRUD in the application. those are not really service objects, but you are extracting some simple logic from controllers to the classes to like prove your skills of architecture. So it's like not the way. And service objects have one public method. And this public method can be called in different way. It can be called run, execute, do, perform, process, start. In short words, some phrase which tells the class to do something. So anyway, you can see any of those variations. According to me, call is more elegant because we can just call the service with this nitty-gritty Ruby syntactic sugar, like this. And it's like more Rubish here, closer to the language. In services, we can handle the validations. We can handle careful validations of params, or we can use our own schema validations. My favorite is like using dry RB and using dry schema or dry structs for the validations on the service level, so that you can first predict the data and the data, and if the data is correct, before reaching the persistence and before reaching the database. And does services runs or raises exceptions, or they should? They should or they not. They may raise exceptions, no problem. Service objects may raise exceptions, but we need to define exact place where we handle those exceptions. So they may raise exceptions, and attention, attention, they may not. You can just handle the exceptions like writing subtle if statements inside the code and returning the errors messages from the services, or adding errors messages to the active record models. So we can introduce something like higher order services. And I've seen this pattern, it was quite great, where the controller hit the public or like the higher order service, and this service was responsible for handling errors of calling other services. Yeah, so it was called from controllers, handling errors, and it was organizing other calls. So it's very similar to use cases, which in hexagonal architecture principle are like adapters for the public endpoints or other contexts in our application to talk with our module or context of the code, with our chunk of code. So it's a solution for something like this. When we are registering user, we are registering it, we are sending the confirmation and running to course, adding this user to the team, and we can have such a chain of calls inside the service. So this higher order service can just operate this service calling, service calling, service calling, service. And is it good or bad? It depends, but it's not that bad. Until it is organized, tested, and testable on the unit level, it's okay when the developers and the business is okay with this kind of solution. And we have those separation in context and modules of the services. So we can have public modules, public classes to communicate with others. In Ruby and Rails, it's a bit different, because in Java, we can define public class, which is exposed outside of the package. But in Ruby, everything is outside in Rails in general. So we can have just public modules directory, and those modules are designed only for being communicated and connected with other layers in the applications. And the same, we can have API classes, API modules, and services gathered in API module, which is accessible only for the controllers. And remember, never return serialized objects from service objects. I've seen projects where there were like active model serializers and data structures returned from the services, and then you cannot reuse those services because it's returning JSONs. And when we are speaking about returned values, so what the service object should return or can return? It can return true or false if action was successful or it was a failure. It could be something like this. It's returning just if user has been registered. Okay? It can return modified object. So it can register user and return the user, and we can have registered user. Or we can pass the user by reference and get some operations on that, and we are just handling this user somewhere above in the controller. It can return success or failure, and here we have something like monads. So we are returning success types. Ruby is dynamically typed language, but let's say we are returning classes instead of values. So we are returning success class and checking if the operation was successful. And we can return success with the result. So we are returning success, adding some result to this success operation, and we can read this result somewhere else or on the controller level. And we can, the same way, we can return failure and errors. So we fail something, and we are adding to the failure object errors, and when the service is returning some data, we can read those errors. Or we can return left and right. So for those who are familiar with Java or seen some projects in Java, there are such pattern of returning left and right. So left means failure, right means success. It's like semantic difference. Or service objects can return events, but please be careful because speaking about events is a totally different topic, and having event-driven architecture is always a good idea. So this implementation can be just difficult for some projects. So we can have registered user service, it can do the logic, and it can return the events. And based on these events, we can publish them and subscribe and so on. So we are speaking about totally different architecture or totally different pattern how to refactor or go out from legacy Rails application. So what libraries, gems, or solutions we can use for the service objects? We can use poros, plain old Ruby objects, so just Ruby classes. Simple, nothing to explain, simple class. Another, I have seen the gem interactor. It's like this, simple gem. And it operates on something like context inside the class of interactors. And on this step, I'm not recommending this solution, but you can see it in the projects you are working with. So it's very dangerous because you can modify this context every time in the class, everywhere in the class. And it looks elegant when you are writing, but when you are debugging, you won't look elegant when you will be debugging because your vocabulary won't be elegant. So another thing is simple command. Simple command is just a simple Ruby abstraction, a very simple class, which adds some superpower to the Ruby Poro classes. So having this extended in our service, we can just call it. We can read like success with a question mark. We can read result, errors, and everything like this from the command. So simple command. I have seen the implementation called Piper service based on Piper RB, and it's like the procedural code. You are working with pipes. Those are just Ruby blocks, and it's quite easy to implement and quite elegant also. But it's like procedural code, so you're writing procedures or steps. And dry monads, it's more sophisticated, and it adds a bit of more abstraction and more possibility and complexity to the Ruby services. So you have this success failures. You can return some strangely looking objects like some or maybe from the services. So it's like the topic for another workshop. Or you can code your custom genius and sophisticated solution as every developer wants. And in almost every project, there is some abstractions built on the abstraction because some developers had more time to code something genius and sophisticated and implement this solution in the project. So to sum up, once upon a time, I read the phrase that we need to always finish the presentation with a wise phrase. It said Elon Musk or someone else. I don't know. I put Elon because it's nice to quote Elon. Everyone will respect you. So let's say it's Elon. And this wise phrase comes from the song Masterpiece, sung by Jessie J, and it's I'm imperfectly incomplete, I'm still working on my masterpiece. So, in conclusion to our service objects and the truth of our service objects, there is no one finished definition or clue or on how to use it or how we can or how we shouldn't use it or something like this. It's still incomplete. It depends on the project. So this is the whole truth about the service objects. They are best for medium-sized objects, but they have also quite low learning curve. So for the junior developer or any other new developer in the project, when he's reading the tree of files in the application, he can see users, create user, registers, and notifications. Those are the names of the files. You are just looking on the tree on the GitHub, and you know what the application is doing. So it's good, quite low learning curve. And when you have the correct separation in modules and in constructors, it can evolve in domain-driven design when your application grows. And it can evolve in application services, domain services, or even aggregates. So be careful using service objects because it can lead you to really serious problems, but analyze the possibilities of your project, focus on the architecture and on problems you are solving. And remember that whatever I said today, your code should do the work. This is the first principle, and your service objects should do the work. And you should remember that. So it doesn't matter how it's doing the work, but all the mystery is to follow the same convention in the project and in the cooperation with your teammates. So thank you very much. And here are my details. And if you have any questions, so please ask.